learning in the Mishnah is we're going through every kind of Shavuot. Now we're up to Shavuos HaPekodin. That's the fourth one on the list. After Shavuos Bitu and all that, should have Shavuos Edis. Now we have Shavuos HaPekodin, which is you deny that you took any deposit from me. You deny really any monetary denial, where you swore that you didn't steal from me and I never lent you any money, and then later you confess that you did steal. So in that case, there you have to pay back the principal. You have to pay back a penalty of a fifth, which works out to a quarter, and then you have to also bring a carbon asham. And we said this doesn't matter whether it's done in a bezin or outside of a bezin. For every shvuah that you swore false and then you admit that you swore false, you have to bring the punishment, the asham, and all that. And okay, we're up to here, about 3 lines above the wide lines. 10 lipe cotton. Give me back my deposit to Messiah, my loan, gezel, vaveda, what you stole, my lost item. Sheyeshli b'yotcha, that of mine, but that's sitting by you. The person responds, shvuah she'ein lo b'yodi, have nothing. Ein chayiv ela achas. Even though I asked you for 4 different things, you're only chayiv one because you made one comment. But if you answer shvuah she'ein loch b'yodi pekadon, shvuah, that you itemize each thing, there's no pekadon. Now, very important, which the Gemara will discuss. It says here a vav by every word. Utsum misyada, there's no loan. Vigezel, there's no stolen item. Ve'aved, a lost object. By the way we read our Mishnah, it sounds like by adding the word "and," you're saying the shvuah that I made should also apply to this, should also apply to that. So it's like I'm making 4 shvuahs now. Therefore, chayv for each one. I'm highlighting that because the Gemara will see an argument between Rabbi Yochanan and Shmuel, whether it has to be an "and" to make each one distinctive. The next case is very similar. Give me my wheat and my barley and kusmin. So it's one tiny, about 3 different kinds of species, as kinds of wheat, grains. And you have shvuah. He answers, I have nothing. Only one, even though I claim 3 things. But if you itemize it, shvuah again the vav the kusmin. I don't have any wheat, barley, or spelt. Chayv for each one. Rab Meir says, "Afilu mechita usaoira the kusemis." Even if he just said 1 single wheat, 1 single barley, and 1 single spelt, chayv kolachavachas. He said and you chayv for each one. We'll see later in the Gemara what exactly Rab Meir is trying to say. But basically, what he's saying is that even though you shouldn't be chayv a shvuah, because it has so little value, it's less than a pruta, and a shvuah, in order to be over, like all these dinim over here, it has to be worth more than a pruta. And nevertheless, here it is, it's good enough, it's a shvuah. Because when you say single wheat, you don't just mean single wheat, you mean the species of wheat. We'll see more later. What happened? He says, Anasta, you raped my daughter, or Petisa, you seduced her, and there's a 50 mana, there's a $50 knas. He's claiming a knas for him. There's also other penalties. There's also baishas shame and pagam, and any you basically ruined her future chances of the ksula because she's no longer a virgin. And the guy responds, we're doing the Mishnah, the last few lines of the Mishnah. He says, Lo yanasti v'lo petisi, I did not do that. Mashbiachani, I'm making a swear of Amr. He said, Amr, chayiv, you are chayiv. You are chayiv because it's as if you made a shvuah. And even though it's talking about knas, you are chayiv. Rav Shimon says, Potter she'eina mishal knas al piyatzah. Rav Shimon says, look, if he would come forward and confess, since it's a penalty, maide beknas Potter, so therefore he didn't really hurt you or harm you because he could have anyway got out of it by just being maide to the knas. Ganafta. And the Gemara will discuss later that according to Chachamim, there's more than just knasi. There's also pagam and boishes. There's money matters. So therefore, there's a shvuah se'edus on that. And we just said in the share earlier this week, which is a nice word, that amen, amen. We learned from Saita. She says amen, amen, and we learned halachas from there. The whole concept of gilgul shvuah, that you can roll other shvuahs. Once you're obligated to make one shvuah, you can make others. But there's a beautiful pshat that one saw that amen, the second amen, these are mitzvahs that women took upon themselves, which are only mitzvahs the rabbanon. And they form the word amen to show their emunah. Amen is aleph is arba kaisis, even though it's time bound, they took it upon themselves. Mem is mikra megillah, and nun is ner Chanukah. as Rabbi Shua Levi says, that those three things, and therefore women do them as well. Anyway, we'll continue. Ganafta es shady. You stole my cow. Boy, I'm looking after did not. Mashbiach and making swear amen, and he said amen. Then chayiv. He is chayiv because it's he owes me money and you try to get out of it. But if he says ganafte, I stole, so therefore he is not denying the stealing part. But he denies the knas part of it. I didn't shecht it or sell it. He guy said I make a swear amen potter. Again, because that's purely knas, and you don't have a shavuos becoming a knas. Hey, mis shorcha es shoyri. Your cow killed my cow. He says, "Loi, hey, mis, never happened." Maj biyachan and making a swear. But he says, "I mean, chayiv is chayiv because there's a monetary thing. We're talking about a muad or even a tam, according to those who hold that chatzin nezik is moment. Because if it's a knas, and with knas, the reason why there's no din of shavuos eidus is because he can always come forward and admit it, and then he would get out of it. Hey, Mishorchas Abdi, your shirt killed my Evet. And who Aimer, and he says, and Loy Hamis, now the din is for an Evet, there's a knas as well. You have to pay 30, a fixed amount. Anytime there's a fixed amount, that's a knas. We don't care about the value of the Evet. Again, because it's knas. About to be, you actually hurt me. And you made by me a chabura. It never happened. Because there's monetary payments here. Amaloi Abda, if his slave said to him, he palta eshina, you knocked out my tooth, she makes his einai, and you blinded me. Now these are all knossim. Never happened. Make this is the rule. Kol hamishalom al pi atzmai chayiv. Anytime if he comes forward and confesses, then he would have to pay. Then if he swears false about it, then he's chayiv. If he doesn't have to pay on his own, potter, he is potter. Says the Gemara at the bottom of the page. They were learning Shavuos, Gemara Shavuos, by Rabba and Yeshiva Rabba. This is the second time we have that people in Yeshiva Rabba were learning Gemara Shavuos. We had before with Eifa, and his brother came along and tested him. And here we have another three Amoraim who sat there learning in Rabba's Yeshiva. Pagabur of Canada, how to come along, and he asked them the following question. Okay, we know that the din of Shavuos Pekatan is only if it's amazed. In other words, he swore false knowingly, or it's a shegig coupled with amazed. He knew he was swearing false, but he did not realize you bring a carbon for it, or he did not even know that there's an aveira for it. But if it was a total shegig, he forgot that he had this deposit, whatever it is, then you don't bring that carbon. So Rav Kahana asked the following question: what happened? Hazy b'Shavuos Pekatan, the Hisabay, and they warned him. In other words, there were two Eidim then he said, the way we learn in Rashi, two Eidim there that said, we know that you have the Pekatan, and we're warning you, don't swear. And he got a warning. Normally, when you defy the warnings of the Eidim, you get Malchus. So what happens that kind of mazid? In other words, if it's a mazid and there's no Malchus, nobody warned him, and then he swore false and he came and confessed, so then you bring the carbon. But here there was a warning. So the question is, does the carbon here usurp the Malchus, or in this case he gets Malchus, or he gets both? That was Rav Kahana's question there. Mao, keeping the Chidushu, the general, it's a novel idea that you did an Avera b'mezid and you still bring a carbon. Even though it's not the only case, we have it by Shavuos Eidus as well, that it's a mazid, or by a shivcha charufah, where it's a mazid and the carbon is brought. The man brings a carbon, she gets malchus, and a nazir that became tummy, even as deliberate, has to bring a carbon. But still, these are four isolated cases. So, do we say since the chiddush, generally speaking, mazid, there's no mazid, you don't bring a carbon mazid. Lamed zayin on the top of the page. So, if you swore false knowingly and you were warned by Eidim. So do we say that, and yet this is an exception to Maisi carbon, generally by Shavuos Pekatan, even though it's been Maisi bringing carbon, so maybe Hacha Maisi carbon. Maybe over here you'll bring a carbon, Loishna Asrabe, Loishna Asrabe. We don't care whether you were warned or not warned, maybe you don't bring a carbon. Oidilma. Sorry, you don't get Malchus, you only bring a carbon. Oidilma perhaps. Hani Mili, when do you say that the mazid you bring a carbon? Heichadola Asrabe, there's no warning, there's no Malchus. Okay, so you bring a carbon. Abel Heichad Asrabe, but where you receive Malchus, they perhaps milkul lucky, carbon le maisi. you only get malchus, no carbon. Like we have a rule, ain't loikinu mishalmin. You don't get malchus and pay. So maybe you only get malchus. That will expiate your sin. That will be your kapara, and you don't need to bring a carbon. Or perhaps ha veha avina, or perhaps a carbon you bring because of Shavuos Daf, you always bring a carbon, and because you were warned by the agent, you get malchus. You get both punishments. Perhaps you get both. That's the question he asked these three students. Amalei. So they said to him, well, there's a clear brisa that should resolve your question. The brisa draws a contrast between Shavuos Daf and over Shavuos Eidus, and it says there, what's the chumrah? Shavuos Daf shechayavin al zdoina makas. If you've been mazed, mazed went ahead and you were warned. Why else would you get makas? You get malchus and valsh gogosa. But if you did it inadvertently, you bring an asham. So what's the chumrah in that? Bekesev shkolim, an asham costs more than a chatas. A chatas is only a danka, the minimum amount, and an asham you have to bring 2 shkolim. Which is a seller. Sorry, bekesev shkolim. You got to bring a shekel. Why? 2 shkolim. Why? So that's a chumrah because it's much more expensive. Rabbeinu Yena says the reason why in asham you pay more money in more brachas, why you pay more money in asham than a chatas. A chatas, you know for sure you sinned. So you're going to bring a carbon, you're going to do tshuva, and you feel contrite. When it comes to asham, we have all kinds of ashams. We have an asham totally, they're not even sure if you sinned. And when you're not sure you sinned, then your guilt conscience doesn't bother you so much. So then you don't really do proper tshuva. So therefore, we make you pay to realize that why did you do the avera, even though you didn't realize you were doing avera, because you are really. You don't even realize how bad you are, that you're inclined to do averis, and therefore you need more tshuva. Or you don't feel guilty enough, therefore we're going to remind you to do tshuva. And once you do it by one asham, we do it across the board by all ashamas. Anyway, so it says, so you have to get 2 shkolim. Now look at the wording. It says, I was doing a makis. For mazid, you get malchus. And for shegi, you get a carbon. It sounds like, but for mazid, all you do is get malchus. Miklal the aserbe, and the only way you get malchus is if you were warned. Ukama makas in carbon loy. All you get is makas. So umay chuvra. I'm not sure why the Gemara is asking a question. Why is malchus more strict than a carbon? I mean, it's an obvious answer. But the Gemara says the nichaleli inish the maise carbon v'luki. Ask anybody what they prefer: bring a carbon or get 39 lashes. Of course, they'll choose a carbon. So this is stricter. Amalu Rabba Bar Itai. So Rabba Bar Itai said to them, if you just had a couple of days ago, Man Tana, if you remember, Reb Shimon made a whole kal v'chayma there. He was trying to work out the Shavuos Daf and the Shavuos Eidus, comparing the two. And Reb Shimon made a comment there in the beginning of the Gemara that Shavuos Daf is different than Shavuos Eidus. That Shavuos Eidus is whether you're b'mezid, whether you're b'shegig, but Shavuos Daf perhaps is only one of them. And also by Shavuos Daf maybe it's only if you swear yourself, but not if you're mushba ayidei acherim. So Amlu Rabba Barita Mantana, who's and Rabba Barita says at the end of the day, even though Rab Shimon then learns echte Gzeira Shava, and therefore he compares Shavuos Daf and Shavuos Eidus, but nevertheless, when it comes to Shegig and Mazid, he maintains the Gzeira Shava from Me'ilah. We learn that from Me'ilah Gzeira Shava, Mo, that just like by Me'ilah, it's only by a Shegig do you bring that carbon Asham Me'ilas. So too, when it comes to Shavuos Daf, Rab Shimon holds is only by Shegig. So he said, "Mantana Zodin Shavuos Hapekodin Loinitla Kapara." Who is the one who says that by Shavuos Hapekodin Mazid you don't bring a carbon? Rab Shimon. It's Rab Shimon. Maybe the author of this brayse is Rab Shimon, who holds that if you're Mazid you get malchus, you don't bring a carbon. Abel the Rabban the carbon not Mazid. We hold that even the Mazid you bring a carbon. Maybe even if you get malchus, you also bring a carbon. Can't prove one way or another. That's what they were saying. Rav kind of got involved in the discussion. He says, okay, I hear what you guys are saying backwards and forwards. You want to bring a raya from there. Rabbi Rita says, no raya. That is the author of the Brisa of Shimon. But let me tell you something. Bar Minodahi. Get rid of this Brisa. Take it off the table. You know why? Not Taninala. Who do you think the source of that Brisa is? I was. In fact, you guys repeated it wrong. This is what the original Brisa actually said. Echad's Daina. The Echad Gogosan. Whether you do a Shavuos Pekadon deliberately, whether you do it inadvertently, Asham, the carbon Asham is Bekeser Shkolim, costs 2 Shkolim. Didn't talk at all about Malchus, not a mention about Malchus. Umay chumra. So what is the chumra then of Shavuos Pekadon over Shavuos Eidos? The Ilahasam Chatas Bazdanka. By Shavuos Eidos, you bring generally a Chatas is only what? A Bazdanka, a minimal amount. Here you bring Kesesh Kolim, which is much more expensive. Nothing to do with, in other words, according to the Brisa, it doesn't introduce at all the idea of Malchus, so we don't know what the Brisa would hold when it comes to Malchus. It's focusing on the carbon, nothing more, nothing less. Says the Gemara, so let's learn from there. The fact is that Mazid, you bring a carbon. Says the Gemara, there's no proof. Maybe it's there's no Hasra. That's why there's no Malchus, only carbon. We don't know what he would hold if there was a warning. Another version as to what was the discussion there between Rav Kahana and the Talmud of the Toshba coming here. They want to bring a knife from our Mishnah. It says, Ein Chayovin Aus Bagasa. It says in our Mishnah, they're not Chayiv for Shogig. Shavuos HaPekadon, if it's for Shogig, it's an accident, you're not Chayiv. If you swore that you don't have, then you forgot that you did. Ma'ain Chayovin, when are they Chayiv? Al Zdoina, if you did it deliberately, Osham, B'Kesev Shkolim. You have to bring a carbon Osham and pay the 2 Shkolim. My labad asabe, l'chayda deliberately, I don't care which way you did it, even there's warning, all you do is bring a carbon. Is hachinami delay asabe. There's no proof from there. Our Mishnah is talking about, but there's no warning. Only possible carbon. He tells you bring a carbon. Toshba. Okay, he's saying more further. Come in here, bring another price. We're talking about a nazir. We're trying to compare nazir to Shavuos Pekadon. No, if you know by a nazir, tamei shekain loike, no, you can't compare anything at all to nazir. A nazir gets malchus, taimeh b'Shavuos HaPekadon she'eino loike. A Shavuos HaPekadon, you don't get malchus. Now, what are we talking about? If we're trying to draw a contrast by Shavuos HaPekadon, you don't get malchus. Nazir, you do. Obviously, we're talking about there was a warning. Because there's no asra, of course you don't get malchus anyway. So the Muslim talking about there's a warning. It clearly says that you don't get malchus. That means they gave him a warning. And it says, say, however, when it comes to Shavuos Pekadon, you don't get malchus. Have a carbon maisi. So it's talking about there was a warning, you deserve malchus. If you won't get malchus, you only get carbon. Says the Gemara, no. Who said that shot? Maybe what it means is that you don't get malchus means you don't only get malchus. You get malchus with the carbon. So in fact, we changed the whole shot. The way you read the Braisa normally sounds like Nazir is stricter than Shavuos HaPekadon, because Nazir you get malchus, you don't. The way we're learning it now is on the contrary. Shavuos HaPekadon is stricter than Nazir. Nazir you only get malchus. Shavuos HaPekadon, malchus alone is insufficient. You also need to bring a carbon. You know what Malchus means? That malchus alone won't do it. Miklal, the ask a question. Well, and Nazir does get away with malchus. Nazir also has to bring karbanis. Miklal the Nazir tameh nifta b'malchus. If he became tameh, he gets malchus warned, and he became tameh, he gets malchus, nothing else. A carbon tzibah, he has to bring karbanis as well. Says the Gemara, Hossam the maisi carbon already has before. You know why a Nazir brings a carbon? Not to remedy the past. In order to be able to kickstart again his naziris. So just like you have mechusa kapara, you have to bring karbanos to be able to re-enter the Beis Hamikdash and eat from karbanos. So to a nazir, to be able to restart and recalibrate his cheshbon of 30 days, he has the carbon is the beginning of a new counting. It's nothing to do with the past. So therefore, Shavuos HaPekadon, you have to bring a carbon and malchus. And by Nazir, all you do is get malchus for the kapara. Amru Rabba Kamed Rabba. So after this discussion, they went back to Rabba and they told him over the whole discussion. And it seems it's sort of not so definitive the end of the discussion whether if we resolved it that you need both malchus and carbon, or the Gemara is saying it's possible that you need both malchus and carbon. Not clear. Anyway, they told over about this whole discussion. Amalahu mechlal. It seems from your discussion, the chiloi asrbei. Since you're only asking a question when there was a warning, it sounds like. But if there was no warning, then there's no question. You bring a carbon. I want you to know kfilas devarim. You're saying the only question you had is if he was warned and you get malchus, do you still bring a carbon? Do you get malchus? Which one is it, or both? Now, it seems, but if there's no warning, even though there were two witnesses there, but they didn't warn him, he brings a carbon. I hold, says the Rabbah, that when you bring a carbon, only if the swearing false would have got him off the line. Okay, if it's swearing we got him off the line, so then he tried to benefit, and now that he admitted he lied, he bring a carbon. But if it wouldn't have helped him at all anyway, because there were two witnesses who know for a fact that he has a deposit, even if they didn't warn him, they're still witnesses to the teveya, to the owner of the object, that he's owed an object. So his shvua against two witnesses wouldn't have helped him. So Rabbah says where the shvua does not help, there's no such thing as a shvua pekadon at this carbon. Alma Kesava Rabba, so it seems Rabba holds Hakoifir the moment Sheyeshol of Edim. If you deny that you have anything to do with money, without witnesses on that money, Potter ya Potter. That's what he says. So now they're going to have a discussion to see whether Rabba is right or not. Rabba Tanya, I'll prove it to you. Tanya Selach, I'll prove it to you. I'll bring a brisa that actually agrees with you. It says over there in this parsha there when it talks about the Shavuos Daf, it says, or he found an Aveda, he found the last object, he denied he ever found it, and then he swore, and he lied about it, and so on and so forth, and then he admits he has to bring a carbon. So it says, the Brisa says, Prat, the Moide, le'echad min ha'achid. There were two brothers who had an inheritance, and he denied to one of the brothers, he admitted, yes, I found an object. The other one, he said, I never found anything. The two partners, they both owned it, and he said to one of them, he admitted to one, and the other one he denied. And he swore falsely. Prat, he swore falsely. Then the din is, we'll see in a minute. But what happens if what do you call it? Prat leleiva. What happens if, let's say, if, let's say, what he's denying is clear, there are witnesses or no otherwise, or there's a document that proves otherwise, then his shvuah didn't help him at all, and then there's no such thing as shvuah as a pekadon in that case over there. So the chayda, it seems clearly like you that if a shvuah doesn't do anything for you, doesn't in any way exonerate you, then it's not called shvuah as pekadon. That's what they wanted to say to support the Rabbah. I'll just show you how honest they are in learning. He could have walked away, and Rabbi would have felt pleased that he had a brisa that proved he was right. But Rabbi turned around. He said, if that's the brisa you want to use to support me, it doesn't really help me out. And why not? Because I can tell you, Levisi there is talking about. He says clearly, I borrowed the Levisi be'edim. There, he with his shvuah, he wasn't trying to get out of it. What he said was, yes, I borrowed $100 from you, but there were no witnesses there. And that's the part that he swore false about. And turned out to be there were witnesses. Having witnesses or not would not have made one iota of a difference because he admitted that he owes the money. That's when we say that it's not a Shavuos pekadon, you don't have to make a carbon. That's what the Bryce is talking about, says Rabbah. Not my kind of a case. But I'm talking about Levisi. I did borrow money, but Levisi, but there were witnesses there. Or Levisi had borrowed, Levisi shtar no shtar. How do I know that's Chat Lebraisa? Because let's look at the first part of the Braisa. Let's analyze the first part of the Braisa. The Kichi denied it, but Prat Lemoid he admitted to one of the brothers. Or one of the partners. What exactly happened there? Let's say it was $100 that he had, and he said $50 to one, and so each brother was owed 50, and he said $50 I owe you. Another one brother, he said it denied. The idach. So he definitely denied. What do you mean there's no Shavuos pekadon? The fact is he denied to one of the brothers that he owes him anything. And of course, the Shavuos Eid, and he later admitted that he swore false, and of course he owes the money. What's going on here? Elalav must be talking about the Amrele. He said, Mitavain and Yosef. He said, yes. They said, you borrowed from both of us $100. The Amalahu, and he said, no, he said, I borrowed from one of you to have a like Fidas Dvari Malma. He said to them, I did borrow the $100, but not from both of you, but from one of you. So that I don't gain anything by this false shvu. I still have to pay out the full $100. So what I'm swearing about is just words. I mean, what's the difference at the end of the day? If it's one, they'll work out between themselves. And so therefore, that's why it's not called a shvuas pekadon. To have a like kfidas dvarim almost no words. U'medereisha kfidas dvarim, since the beginning, it's talking about just words. It's not really Shavuos Pekadon. Sefer not make kfidas dvarim. So the Sefer also kfidas dvarim. That's why he's potter. Nothing to do with my case over here. Says the Gemara further. Now we're going to ask a number of questions at Rabbah, and eventually we're going to repudiate what Rabbah said. Says the Gemara. Let's say if he forgot when he made the shvur, he totally forgot that Itaka had a deposit. He's not chayiv on the shoygig. Umau chayiv als doiner. And what is he chayiv? It's not Mishnah. What is he chayiv if he was bemazed? Asham bekesef shkolim. He's chayiv what? A korban asham and paid 2 shkolim. My lab, what are we talking about when he says Zodin? What does Zodin mean? We're going to go through the same proofs we discussed before with Rav Kahana. We're going to go through similar, but asking questions on Rabbah. My lab, Zodin Adim. The Chayda, it's made against Adim. So if he's swearing against Adim, it's useless, right? You can't swear against Adim. And yet we're saying that what? That's you bring a korban asham. Doesn't that prove that even though your shvur didn't achieve anything, you still have to bring korban asham? Says that's no proof. Lo Yizod Natzim was talking about, but there were no witnesses there at all. He just knew that he was lying, and then later admitted, no, without witnesses. So therefore, he did achieve something. When he swore, he would have walked away free. Toshra, next part it says, we learned in the early Mishnah how you stay keep the Eidim. You remember by Shavuos Eidim we learned the same thing. The Eidim have to be able to achieve something with their Shavuos. So he said, how you stay keep the Eidim, the 2 groups of Eidim. Kafar Yisrael, the first group denied that they have any testimony to help this guy out, Shavuos Eidim. And the Achikar Kafar Shni, and then the second group came along and said, also we have nothing to help you out with. Shtei and Chayobis. They are both Chayiv. Why are they both Chayiv? Each group could have helped him, so each group hurt him. And when we asked the question before the Gemara, I understand why the second group is chayiv, because they were the last hope. And when they said I can't help him, that's it. They heard him. But when the first group said we can't help you, the second group was still around. So the first group didn't really hurt him. So how come they're also liable? Why in the world is the first group chayiv? The second group is here, so doesn't that prove that by Shavuos Eidos, and we're comparing Shavuos Eidos, that if you're prepared to swear, false, even though you're not really hurting the person, it's not impacting him money wise, you're still liable. So same thing Shavuos Pekadon, not like Rabbah. Says the Gemara, Omer Ravina said, no. If you remember the Gemara before, we're talking about where the first group did hurt him monetarily. You know why? Because the second group were married to 2 sisters, or they were married to a sister of one of the people there. And because they were married to sisters at the time, they were not available, or they were disqualified for giving any testimony. So when the first group said, we have nothing to say for you or to help you out, or no testimony to give, they were hurting. They were actually hurting the person. And then what happened later was that the second group divorced, and therefore they were no longer brothers-in-law, and they can testify. So therefore, we're talking about perhaps that they were harming monetarily, and there's not a question on Rabbah at all. They were relatives to their wives. Then it's just saying glaciuses, and the wives were dying. But even though the wives were dying, and even though Reiv Geis Lemisa, majority of people who are Geises are dying, nevertheless, at the moment they're alive, their brother-in-law, they can't testify. Most people who are dying go to Misa. Kamash Malon comes to tell you about Hashtamias Chayanina. Comes to tell you that now they're alive and they're not dead, and therefore their brothers-in-law, when the first group withheld the testimony, they were actually hurting the person. And therefore, we're talking about they are hurting the people. They are hurting. Says about it further. Toshma, come in here. We know that you're a Shem Mechinam, so the din is that a Shem Mechinam is potter from Geneva, Baveda was stolen. What happens if the Shem Mechinam says, the goods were stolen? Turned out to be that he himself was a Ganav. It's called a Toyin Tainas Ganav. He himself was a Ganav. He gets penalized just like a Ganav. He has to pay the kefil and all that. So, and he has to make 3 different vows. Toshma Balabayis Balabas Shaton. Tainas Gane Bepekod. A Balabas a Tainas Gane by a Pekod. Benishba, no, but he said it was stolen. Benishba prepared to swear. He swore it was stolen by somebody. And then Bahoide came forward and look, he admitted that he himself was the Ganef. Obo Aiden came along witnesses. and the witness came along. Now remember, if he comes forward, he's a ganef. A ganef comes forward, steps forward, and says, "I'm a ganef." You don't pay the penalty because Maida Beknas is potter. But if the Adim came first and then you're Maida, as far as the penalty is concerned, you have to pay it because you weren't made to be knas, you're chayiv. So this is as follows. Bo Adam, witness came along, so it depends. If he was made at first, so he doesn't pay the kefil, but he swore false. So then the only din that kicks in is a false shavua. So he has to pay the principal, he has to pay the penalty of a fifth, which is a quarter, and he has to bring the carbon ush. But he doesn't pay the double because he was made first. What happens after the witnesses came? He was made. Because he was made after the witnesses came, he already has to pay the double. And once he has to pay the double, he doesn't. And now, true, he swore false, but he doesn't pay the penalty of the fifth. He just brings the carbon ushim as far as the shvu is concerned. He's mishal and tashlumi kefil. He pays the tashlumi kefil, and the ushim, he pays the ushim. And the ushim is because he made a shvu and he admitted. You don't pay the chaimish. Because you only pay a chaimish if you're paying merely the principal. But the moment you pay more than the principal, then you don't pay the chaimish. So we see from here also, so we pay the chaimish. So he answers like Ravina. So what happened over here was that over here there were witnesses. We're saying witnesses came, and if witnesses came, that means that his shvuah didn't help anything, and yet we're making a pay a carbon ashim. So the Gemara answer will use the same answer of Ravina. At the time that he confessed, the witnesses couldn't have come forward because they were brothers-in-law. Their wives were sisters, and now they can come forward because they died or they were divorced, whatever. So therefore, they're no longer brother-in-law. And that's why they can come. Ravina, the very same Ravina says to Rav Ashi, I'll bring another proof to repudiate the Rabba. Toshma coming here, it says, we just had before. If you did it amazing, you get malchus. Obviously, there was a warning, you get malchus. There were witnesses. When there's a shaking asham, you pay the asham two shkalim. The moment you say get malchus, here we're not interested in the Malchus part. We're interested now in the witnesses part. McClaldy gave no witnesses. And yet, you say clearly, our Gogosa Osham, Bekeser Shkolim. You say clearly that on a Shegig, he brings a carbon Osham, Bekeser Shkolim. Now, but we see clearly from here that there was Adim over there, which means the Shvuah didn't help anything at all. And yet he gets punished for the false testimony. So what it says, we already said before that you can't learn this brisa because we already said before this brisa has nothing to do with witnesses. There's no malchus. Remember, Rav Kahana came along and said, "I'm the one who conveyed this brisa." And who the Amalu Rav Kahana not in love. This is how it said. Echad's dain of echad goes to asham beketz shkolim. So he made a shegi. You bring a carbon asham. There's no malchus because there's no witnesses. No witnesses here. Okay. So therefore, no question on Rabbah from here. So Tashma, come in here. Lost the place, sorry. Tashma, come here. Lloyd is the next price we brought before. Imamrid, but Nazir Tome, if you say by Nazir Tome, she came like a Nazir Tome gets Malchus. So we're talking about there were witnesses there. When else to get Malchus? Tome, Bishwar, Sapakot, and Shane like you don't get Malchus. So, and there were witnesses there. Now, hey, what we're talking about. Either like if no witness at all, am I like? Pshita, the Ikaina witnesses. Uktami, and it says that Bishwas of a cotton, you don't get Malchus. And what? Milkud and Lucky, Abel carbon mice, which is in carbon. Clear from here that there's no Malchus. That even though there were witnesses, okay, you told me before they didn't give any warning. Doesn't matter, warning, no warning, but there are witnesses here. So his shvuah didn't achieve anything. And yet we're saying that he has to bring a carbon asham. What does that prove? That we don't care whether your vow or your oath helps you or doesn't help you. If you made a false vow, you have to bring that carbon asham and the penalty. You have to the rabba, it's a question that repudiates completely rabba. It completely puts talking about it further. So now we have another view. Rabbi Yechon says, says if you're denying money that has witnesses, the witnesses know that you owe the money. And you swear, no, I don't owe the money. The din is chayiv, you are chayiv, your shvuah. Not like Rabbah said that you're not. He said even though your shvuah did not help, you're still chayiv. But b'shtar potter, If there were no witnesses there, but there's a document that obviously disproves you, then you are potter. Now, why should there be a difference if why should it be potter by a star? Is the reason because you're swearing didn't help? So why are there aidim there? Are you chayiv? So Amar Papa said maybe Rabbi Yechon is sort of following a little rabbi, and that is my type Rabbi Yechon aidim avida demaisa. You know why by aidim your shvua can help potentially. There's a potential shvua that can help you. How? If the aidim die, they disappear. Then your shvua would have exonerated you. Or the star hamana, the star is always here. So the shvua against star never helps. That's why you're potter. Following the logic of Rabbah. Star can get lost. Of course, it can get lost. So if there's potential there as well. What's the difference? Nothing to do with Rabbah. You know the difference is? Even if the shvur doesn't help, you have to bring a carbon. But you know what Rabbi Yechon's reason is? Every star has in it a lien on properties. And the rule is aim mevi'in carbon al kvidish shibakakois. Just like you don't swear. There's no shvua by kvidish kakois. We had it in the beginning of Batzia and other places. Since there's no shvua, we'll have it later. There's no shvua by kvidish kakois. So therefore, the whole idea of shvua sapakadan doesn't apply to a star which is connected to karka, because there's no shvua by karka. Traces here asks a very fundamental question. He asks it also in the beginning of Batzia and other places. And what's fascinating is the answer. Tracy asks a very simple question. If there's no shavua by shibud karkais, every star involves karka. So according to Rabbi Yechon holds that shibuda the araisa, which means that automatically if I lend you money mahatorah, there's a lien on all your properties. It's the Rabbanan that stepped in and said, look, milva al peh, we decided to remove the lien of the properties for reasons otherwise there'll be difficulties. You know, it's a Rahmanas and the Lakuchas, they'll buy, they won't have a clue that there was a lien on the property because there's no recording, there's nothing recorded, there's no contract, no documents. So Takonas Lakuchas, we said, no, say the Lakuchas, we don't want to lose out, we cancel it. So Tesis asks, according to Rabbi Yechanan, every shvur that we learn in Shas, Maida b'miktzas, these are the shvurs Matera. Now, Maida b'miktzas, shvur Shemin, how can you ever swear? Every shvur which involves money involves property. And if it's by Maida b'miktzas alone, every loan involves property. And Einish boy, not I admitted to $50 and I deny $50, I'm denying $50 worth of property. So Tesis says in Bab Metzia, not here Bab Metzia, Tesis answers, the only time every Gemara that we learned about a shvur, Mahatorah, would only be by a person who owns no property. If he owns any property, then there's no shvur of Maida Mixus. Tesis here says, we're talking about a case where the guy was moichel. He said, you know what, I'm lending you money and don't worry about the property. So there's always dinner that we're learning now suddenly became so limited as to where they actually apply, which is quite astonishing. Okay. Something about it further, we learned now that you raised the idea of property, majbia, edekarka, what happens if you're majbia? Let's say I want you to testify, sure, and you have testimony to help me out regarding my properties. And this guy did not have nothing to help you out with. I can't help you at all. I can't help you. Is there the din of shur se'edus when it comes to karka or not? Says the Gemara. Once said one, we never really knew who said what. This time I can conclude that Rabbi Yechon is the one who says that you are potter, because since as we just said, there's no shvua by karka, so therefore, if you call these people in, testify on my behalf, this house belongs to me. There's no shvua there. There's no shvua seidus. But Rabbi Yechon makes a distinction between if you're opposing edim or if you're swearing against shtar, and the only possible logic is like Rabbi Huna B'Rei Yeshua said, because on karka you don't swear. Okay, Rabbi Huna B'Rei Yeshua to time concludes clearly. Rabbi Yechon holds that the din of shvua seidus does not apply to property. Let us say that Rabbi Yechon and Rabbi Elazar are arguing actually the plukta, the Rabbi Elazar and Rabbanan. They're arguing in the same machlekes of Rabbi Elazar and the Rabbanan Kamifagi. And what's the story there? That now we learned in the middle of the whole parsha of Shavuos Daf in the Torah, it also talks about if you stole an item and you have to the it's like zelash goza, you have to return it. It's all right in the middle of the parsha. So it goes as follows. It says that now we learned Hagoizo Sada Mechaveir. If somebody steals a field from his friend, and now suddenly it was flooded with water. The field is ruined. Generally speaking, a ganif is when he steals something, he has kinyonik zel, he has to lift it, schlep it in order he acquires it. Now that he's totally responsible. Any accidents happen, there's no excuse. It's your fault. You have to compensate the original owner. But what happens when it comes to karka? So there's a machlekes whether karka nigzelis or karka ain't nigzelis. A karka can never be stolen, so therefore, even though I pushed you out and I'm sitting in the karka, you can't really steal karka. And if it was flooded, it's your property that got flooded. Or do we say, no, when I stole the karka, it became mine, and if anything happens to it, even though it's by accident, I'm responsible, have to pay. So we have a machlekes between Rabbi Yechon and Rabbi Elazar, and it goes as follows. It's not we learned somebody steals a karka steals from his friend. The shavuos got flooded. Well, it's your responsibility, and because God can exelis, he stole it, and now you have to reimburse him. Chachamim say, you could tell him, Harei shul cholofanecha. The property is still yours. I never made kinyonim in the property. Karka cannot be stolen. And when it got flooded, it was your land that got flooded, not mine. We said there the Micah. So what's the crux of the argument? Rabbi Lezer darshins ribuy umiyat. Just to remind you quickly, we had already a few times before. Ribuy umiyat or klal prat. Ribuy umiyat, it's the same format. You have a generic term, a very specific, and then a generic. According to Rabbi Lezer, we had Rabbi Kiva, we had the beginning of Shavuos, the argument of Kiva, Rabbi Shmuel. If you, Rabbi Shmuel call prat, Rabbi Kiva hold ribuy umiyat. Ribuy means you include everything. Then when you have a miyat written afterwards, the miyat is just coming to define the riba the miyat is coming to say that we're limiting it like a cloud prat cloud, only things which are similar to this miyat. And then we have another riba at the end, it coming to expand. Everything is included except that which is the furthest thing from the miyat. That's even miyat riba. So which means karka will be included. However, if you learn klal prat klal, if you have a klal the prat is coming to limit the klal. The prat is saying that the klal only applies to this prat. And then when you have another klal afterwards, it comes to expand only things which are similar to the prat. And that's why karka will not be included, as the Gemara explains. Says the Gemara, it says in the pasuk, if he denies his friend by bekudin or a loan or stolen, and then that's riba, anything, discussing anything, property, not property, anything. And then the bekudin b'tzum yad miyat, limiting to things, like a loan, monetary, and so on. And then it says, oy mikol asher yishava, or anything that he swears from, chazav ribuy. Ribuy miyat ribuy hakol, everything's included in this Shavuos hapekudin. My riba kol mili, or Shavuos includes everything. My miyat, what are we excluding? The thing which is the furthest thing from it. What's the furthest thing? Shtaris. Why is shtaris the furthest thing? Because it has no intrinsic value. Everything else has intrinsic value. It's just a piece of paper representing value, no intrinsic value. So therefore, according to Rabbi Lezer, property, land can be stolen. The Rabbanan dashi klal prat klal, the kichi b'misa the klal, the kodem b'tzuz yazem prat, I begin prat. Oim mekol ashi yishava lo b'rini yiswer chazav v'kol klal prat klal. You don't get any prat. We're only marbet things that are similar to the prat. Ma prat mefurish. What do we know about the prat? Davar metaltal, something which is mobile, portable. The gufay mammon has a value. So what's included in the Shavuos? The Shavuos Pekudin, what's included? Av kol dover hametaltal has to be something which is portable, not land. And gufay mammon has to be something that has value and not a star. Yotzu karkois, we exclude karkosh a metaltal. It's not metaltal. And yotzu avodim shehuklu karkois. We know it's nachaltam oisim. We know from the word nachaltam oisim talking about slaves that they are considered equal to property, so therefore they're not included. And yotzu shtadas and documents are also excluded. Metaltal, they are mobile. Portable, ain't gufan mammon. They have no inherent value. So l'chayda, I would say that one who holds that Adam can testify about property holds like Rabbi Lezer, and because it's ribuy mid ribuy, and man the potter holds like the Rabbanan. The property is excluded, so therefore Shavuos is also we exclude property. Amalei said, "Lo no." Man the mechayev, you're right. The one who says that property is included in, let's say, in Shavuos is definitely holds like Rabbi Lezer. The property is included, ribuy mid ribuy. But a man the potter, the one who says that property is not included, doesn't necessarily have to follow the Chachamim. He can even follow Rabbi Lezer. How does that work? Amla Baha. Rabbi Lezer would hold by Shavuos HaPekadon. I feel that Rabbi Lezer would be moide that by Shavuos HaPekadon property is excluded. Why? Because it says in the pasuk, Mikoil Asher Yishav Shaka, from everything, not everything. The loy hakol, not everything. So it comes the extra word Mikol to exclude by Shavuos HaPekadon. Amar Papa says Mishnah says Ganafta Shady. He says, you stole my cow. I did not steal it. Mashbiachani, I'm making a swear. Omar Omein Chayiv. Now later on in the Mishnah we talk about an Eved. That your shirt killed my Eved, and it was a knas. Why don't you mention Eved here as well? Lila Ganafta is Abdi Laktani. It doesn't say you stole my Eved. Why doesn't it say it? Because an Eved cannot be stolen. Why? Because Karka ain't an exelis and an Eved cannot be stolen. My time, a lot from the evidence to the karka, because the evidence compared to karka. They ain't bringing carbon, like fish with a They don't bring in carbon. That's why we don't bring it. Omar Rapopi said, Mash made Rava. So Rapopi, his brother, comes along. So name of Rava, no rai from here. So, I'll bring you. Look at the end of the mission. It says in the Sefer, Cloud. This is the rule. Call Hamishalim Alpi Atzmai. Anybody, that's a monetary thing. If you admit you'll have to pay, then you have chayiv. You have to bring the carbon. So let's say it's a knas, and you don't have to pay on your own. Potter is potter. What's the Mishnah adding? The Mishnah gave so many examples. What's the Mishnah adding here? Blasui, my lab Blasui, is coming to say that if he said you stole my eved, since an eved is a knas, so therefore you are potter. Sorry, an eved, if you stole my eved. The other cases of knas is when you beat my eved. But if you stole my eved, you stole something, you stole property, and you chayiv an asham, even though an eved is equated to kakois. So the first part, you brought a eye from the first part of the Mishnah that an eved is not included, so eved is not karka. I'm bringing a eye from the end of the Mishnah that it seems that eved is karka, because otherwise, what else is Mishnah coming to include? You can't bring any eye from Mishnah one way or another. Of what our Mishnah would hold regarding an eved, if it's compared to karka or not compared to karka. Okay, have a good walk, everybody. Shavuos Tov. I'll see you next time. It's Hashem.
Shavuos Tov.